We are 3 weeks away from the 2021 NFL Draft right here in the CLE. I'm Jason Gibbs alongside Andrew Gribble. This is the best podcast available, episode number 9, as we get a little bit closer to the 2021 NFL Draft, inching our way to that finish line and the big night in Cleveland, the big weekend in the CLE. The commissioner will be here. Some of the draft picks will be here. Promises to be an awesome weekend down on the lakefront. Let's just hope Mother Nature cooperates, and we're in a good place 3 weeks from now. If we can get the weather, Gribble, this week, 3 weeks from now, life will be really good.
I think for multiple reasons, I would have been cool with the draft just being this week. You know, nice weather, you get it over with before the end of April. We can officially move on to the offseason workout program and get these guys here, but the wait will continue for, 3 weeks. So I think we can survive.
I think we can as well. Coming up on the program today, Bruce Feldman from Fox Sports, The Athletic, New York Times best-selling author, and a guy who's really plugged into the college football landscape joins us. And you want to learn some things, today is the day. Bruce Feldman, almost 30 minutes with Bruce, talking about defensive ends, corners, linebackers, wide receivers, you name it in this draft. Bruce has done a lot of research and taken a lot of time. And Gribbs, I know you go back with him a little bit to your days when you were covering the SEC. And the guy knows a ton. And he put out a mock draft, but more so than the mock draft, it's about the NFL and college people that he talked to and their thoughts on each one of those picks that he ended up making.
Yeah, and I think with Bruce, I mean, he's one of the most respected voices in college football, and I like that it's almost like now in the last few years he's kind of dipped his toe into the draft circuit, and I think that's the best thing you can want with someone as knowledgeable as he is. And I think the most interesting thing, and we get into this when we talk to him, is every year he talks about these athletic freaks in the draft, and he talks about them at the college level too. And there's a couple that are kind of linked to the Browns there at the bottom of the first round, and it's interesting to get his insight because he's known about these guys for years.
So we will hear from Bruce Feldman coming up in just a few minutes. Right now, these are the stories that are making news this week, 3 weeks out from the NFL draft. Mock drafts continuing to have us selecting a linebacker, Gribble. And it's interesting. I'm not saying that they clearly know something or think a certain way, but it is interesting that linebacker keeps coming up to us in a lot of these mocks. The most recent one, Daniel Jeremiah's mock 3.0, the linebacker from Kentucky, Jamin Davis, coming to us. It's just interesting that linebacker keeps coming up when the linebacker room's pretty full all of a sudden.
Yeah, and I think it might just be a byproduct of the fact that the Browns don't necessarily have a big name at the position the same way they do at corner with Denzel Ward, and at defensive end with Myles Garrett, and even at defensive tackle. Sheldon Richardson's a big name in the league and has been around for a while. So linebackers seem to make sense. I think I could completely rule it out at this point, especially with the way the draft falls. Say the corners and the defensive ends that you identify as first round worthy are gone, and then you're left with a linebacker that is a first round worthy pick, and that's the guy you go with. It definitely would not be my pick at this point in the process. I wouldn't put it as the number one thing I think is likeliest to happen, but I can't rule it out at this point. And I think with the player that Daniel Jeremiah links to the Browns, Jamin Davis, I mean, this is a guy that has seeming not really come out of nowhere, but just has made the most out of the last few months and just looks like a total freak and a guy that could really help your defense just from a pure athleticism standpoint.
Yeah, something to continue to watch, because those mock drafts continue to have linebacker going to us, and where there's smoke, maybe there's a little fire as we're approaching.
Someone's got to take them.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you're right. And it goes back to best player available. And if the best player left or available at 26 is a linebacker, you might be foolish not to take that person.
I wouldn't say that the linebacker position with the Browns is like the running back position. I mean, you're not just set with your guys there. I mean, I think that there's room to grow and room to get better. And I think with one of these picks, I imagine you would take a linebacker. It's just a matter of if you're going to value it enough to take it with the first pick. So we'll see. Again, would it surprise me? Maybe not. But I'm back and forth on it. But I think I still see the majority of people plugged in going with either a pass rusher or a corner, just because I think they know those are the money making positions in the NFL, and you try to get them if you can.
Amen to that. Speaking of that corner position, Ryan McChrystal from Number Fire and Sharp Football, along with Warren Sharp earlier this week, tweeting out these reported virtual visits and starting to leak out who's meeting with who. And according to them, the Browns have met with 4 corners in Horn, Farley, Samuel, and Newsome. I don't think that's a big surprise based on the fact that that corner room still needs a few more bodies. And I would say that defensive end room needs a few more bodies as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think all 4 of those players make sense. And I think if you're looking at it, the hope is that at least one is available at number 26. And I don't know if that's a gift. I don't know if it's a guarantee. I mean, I think that especially with the way people are talking about J.C. Horn, Greg Newsome has seemingly risen from a guy that people mentioned as a second-round pick to now going in the upper 20s. So that's someone that you look out for. And Caleb Farley, before the back injury, he was a top half of the first round kind of guy as well. So all of them are super talented guys, corners that you would want on your team. And particularly with Farley, you're just going to have to trust the medicals and see what is the right spot for him to go where you're willing to take that risk, or if the back thing is not a big deal at all and you get a steal at number 26.
Yeah. I mean, they're doing their homework, meeting with guys, and we'll see where these chips fall. I mean, they're doing their due diligence, and, I think they need to. And like you said, it'll be interesting to see if any of those 4 are still on the board by the time we get to pick number 26. Finally, the Sam Darnold trade has finally happened. And I don't know if any of us saw him going to Carolina, but that's where he is. And not a lot given up. The Jets get a 6th rounder this year and a 2nd and a 4th next year. You get 3 picks. Carolina's got a couple different quarterbacks, and maybe there's still a chance that if there's a quarterback on the board at number 8, that the Panthers get another quarterback there as they try to develop and try to see what they have with Sam Darnold, and if Teddy Bridgewater is a part of that or not, to be determined.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely don't think this rules out the Panthers taking a quarterback with their first pick, just because, like you said, the cost wasn't too much, and Darnold's on the final couple years of his rookie deal. So I think that's something to pay attention to. The Falcons are in an interesting spot because they have a quarterback that is, I would say, right around the top half of the league in Matt Ryan, and I think he's got at least a few years left. They've got a new head coach who I think would want to win, and I think your path to winning the fastest would be Matt Ryan and not a rookie quarterback. But then you have a new GM who's got to look to build for the future. So I do wonder if the compromise between drafting a QB at 4, like the Falcons could be, or drafting like the top player to give Matt Ryan, the compromise might be trading down and getting another good player later in the first round and stockpiling your assets. Because I do think that spot in the draft could be incredibly valuable. The only issue is you may not be able to do that. You probably would have to make some deals based on hypotheticals before the draft, before you can actually execute, because I think there is still a tiny bit of mystery around what the 49ers are going to do at number 3. And I think that even though many people think it's Mac Jones, it might not be. And I think some teams may not be willing to trade up to 4 with that uncertainty of not knowing who they could get. So Falcons are in a good spot because I think if they just stick there, they could take Kyle Pitts and that offense could really take off. And I think that, but they can truly trade down and build that team for the future while also being competitive in the present. Because as bad as their record was last year, I didn't think that they were necessarily a bad team. And I think that they're always going to be good on offense with the playmakers they have. So now it seems like, even though no one knows what the 49ers are going to do officially, it almost seems like the draft now starts at number 4, and we'll see what ends up happening at its spot.
Yeah, I know Adam Schefter was reporting earlier in the week, the Falcons are entertaining calls, and you got to wait for the right offer, and that right offer might not come till the Falcons are actually on the clock 3 weeks from now. So
yeah, I think we're going to be waiting a little bit.
Yeah, and I think it like you said, I'm not sold that the 49ers and everybody thinks that they're taking that Alabama quarterback. I'm not so sure about that, and it'll be interesting to see how that unfolds as well. So a lot of moving, a lot of shaking here around the league. The Browns just sitting back and watching it all unfold, which is always a good thing this time of year. For more on the NFL draft, especially on the defensive side and the players that are coming out in this first round, a little wide receiver talk. Asked him a tough question, Kyle Pitts or a certain wide receiver, and he was he didn't like that question. It was a tough question for him, to say the least. A lot of good stuff with Bruce Feldman from Fox Sports and The Athletic. Have a watch and have a listen. And here on the best podcast available, happy to be joined by one of the best in the business when it comes to covering college football, and dialed in, Fox Sports, New York Times bestselling author, writer for The Athletic. Make sure you go to theathletic.com today and get a subscription so you can read all of his fine work and hear him on the podcast side of things, especially I know Ryan Russillo's podcast most recently talking about your mock draft. The great Bruce Feldman joins us. And Bruce, appreciate a few minutes of your time, and a few weeks away from the NFL draft, but real quick, wanted to circle back to your experience this past college football season and what it was like covering this in the middle of a pandemic with teams playing, not playing, games being canceled 24 hours out, maybe the morning of, and all the challenges that you went through here in this past year.
Yeah, I mean, I was thankful that we were able to get a season in. It was different. Last year, in 2020 season, I always say last year and I think of 2019, but I was in the studio with our Big Noon kickoff show. So it meant the previous 5 years I'd been a sideline reporter. So good part was I got to see my family a lot more. It was different. I think in those shows, especially on the Big Noon show where I would have a 4 a.m. wake up call and we'd be on by 7. There was a lot of stuff that, like you said, day of cancellations or just kind of the Big Ten when and if they were coming back, the Pac-12 when and if they were coming back. And then once you got into it, I remember there was one particular Saturday morning where I don't even remember exactly now what I was supposed to talk about in our A block, but it became the Clemson FSU, who, should they have backed out of the game, all this drama that came from it, and a lot of finger pointing. And it wasn't like the most, I think in a lot of ways, some of this brought out some of the worst in people in regards to some of the finger pointing and some of the innuendo stuff. On the other side of it, and this was a good lesson for me early on, the first week of the actual season, there was a couple of Sun Belt teams that beat Big 12 teams. And I remember talking to one of the ADs in the Sun Belt, maybe the next day, and he made the point where this is so different and so much stress on everybody involved in the process because you celebrate a big win. Normally, you go out and you party with your buddies and kind of can let your hair down. Can't do that in a pandemic, really, or else you create all sorts of problems. So that was a good reminder. I think it was a lot of people were asked to be way more disciplined and accountable than they've ever been asked to be. And, knock on wood, hopefully we are going to have a much more normal 2021.
Bruce, whenever we talked to Browns GM Andrew Berry and other scouts, they talked about how obviously it was a little weird to go virtual, but they treated this past season as business as usual, and they were able to evaluate guys, and they're confident going into this draft that they've got a full read on this. What have you heard from just scouts, and from what you saw this past college season, how close to normal was this whole process in terms of talent evaluation and getting a good feel on who the best players really are in this draft?
Yeah, I think it's going to be a lot more a little blind, to be honest, because just you can't be there as much. The contact was different. Obviously, the medical piece of the combine, which we all know is not something that they show on TV, but that's a critical element of it. I think there's a part of it where you have a bunch of players who are likely to be first-round picks who opted out, and so. Greg Rousseau is a young defensive lineman at Miami who had a huge 2019 season. It was really his only year that he's played big-time college football. He was a developmental guy who blew up in 2019. There was a lot of COVID issues around him. He opted out. I talked to a bunch of people in the Miami program who love the kid, but like where is he in his development just because he's played one season less of football. And I think there's just a lot of uncertainty. You may have some guys who end up in the 5th or 6th round. You're like, whoa, that guy's a first round talent. Why was he, what happened? Well, COVID kind of happened, right? And so I just think there's so much uncertainty that's going to go into it because people had to be pretty hands off. I mean, it's not, I don't think, the scouts and the personnel people are, very diligent, and they're going to do everything they can to try to close gaps in that. But even Zach Wilson, who's really blew up and was a breakout star in 2020, the BYU quarterback, there's other people who are going to go, you know what, in 2019, when they actually played a more competitive schedule, he was banged up. He wasn't healthy. He wasn't the guy that we saw in 2020. In 2020, unfortunately, through no fault of BYU's, their schedule got really watered down because they couldn't get couldn't get any Power 5 opponents. So, I think, there's a lot more uncertainty in a process that already has a lot of uncertainty built into it.
And with the opt-out guys, is it almost like there's a couple guys that were immune to falling stock-wise, like a Jamar Chase and Penny Sewell, but for the other guys, is there value maybe for some of these guys potentially falling because of that decision?
Yeah, to me, Jamar Chase is about as sure a thing as any opt-out guy is. Now, he played it wasn't like he had a huge freshman year. He was a solid player, but in 2019, when they had the national title run, I mean, he had a remarkable year, and he ate up every big-time defensive back he saw and played great on a big stage. The other thing with him, I think, is he was the best receiver on the LSU offense that almost everybody inside the program would tell you in 2019. The second best receiver, Justin Jefferson, went to the Vikings and had a monster rookie year. I think that helps you give a sense of what Jamar Chase is. So, but then there's other guys in there who I think Greg Rousseau to me is high on that list of what are you going to get? Where is he? Not because there's character questions, because there really aren't, but it's just more of he just hadn't played a lot. I mean, you have, Virginia Tech has a big time athlete at cornerback, Caleb Farley. He opted out. I mean, there's some questions. I mean, he is incredibly fast and long, but there are concerns when you talk to coaches who have played against him about, his tackling ability and some other things where they say needs a little or a lot of work. And if you're talking about a top 15 talent, that's a big investment in somebody like that. And, there are a bunch of guys who fit into that category of opted out, and we don't know what that means. Meaning, there's a big defensive tackle, Tyler Shelvin, who played at LSU, had a really good 2019. Some people thought he had a chance to play, maybe be a first round pick. He opted out. I think people wondered, is he going to show up at 400 pounds? Because he's a weight issue guy. He showed up at his pro day at 350, which is probably a little higher than optimum, but not that much higher. But my guess is he's not going in the first 3 or 4 rounds. And if he had played in 2020, maybe that's a different story. So I just think there's just so many stories you're going to see of that, of, hey, what about this guy? I mean, University of Washington has a couple of D linemen who I think may play in the first round, but, they just, Levi Onwuzurike and Joe Tryon, just, they're very talented athletes, but again, they didn't play. And I think it's a different situation for them than, as you mentioned, Penei Sewell, for the Oregon offensive lineman, I think was a little more of a known commodity, even though he only played 2 years.
Talking with Bruce Feldman from The Athletic and Fox Sports, and one of the best when it comes to covering college football. And Bruce, you mentioned Greg Rousseau, obviously the defensive end out of Miami. Guy on the other side of him, Jalen Phillips, is an intriguing prospect as well. And I know someone here in Cleveland, the Browns fans are looking at both of those guys between Rousseau and Phillips. What do you make of Phillips on the other side and what he's done here in this offseason getting ready for the draft?
He is going to be a really tricky evaluation for the NFL. I know a lot of those Miami guys who were around him and coached him, and they said nobody played harder. He's also a super freak athlete. I don't want to say, I mean, you guys have one there in Myles Garrett, who's like a fractional, 0.5% kind of special athlete. There's just not, even in the special world of NFL talent. Jalen Phillips, I think, is in that mold. I mean, he's not quite as big, but he is just a really remarkable athlete. He went to UCLA. He was a 5-star guy. He had concussion issues. I think there were concerns about how much he loved football at that point. His career basically got derailed by injury, and people wondered, how focused was he on football. He went to Miami, and I don't think the Miami staff had that much. I think they were just kind of like, okay, let's see what we get. I don't think they were buying in, saying, oh, this is a 5-star guy, he's going to tear it up. And over time, they saw how hard he worked. He reshaped his body because he had really lost a bunch of weight before he got to UM. He bought in as much as anybody did to their program. And then when Rousseau opted out privately, they were like, we have somebody who we think can be maybe even better, but we got to see it. And he played that way. He wowed them. But I think from the NFL standpoint, there's going to be the two lingering questions are going to be the concussion issue, which honestly, I don't know, you can't really say he has any control over. It's just, is that something where it could be some, bad fortune, and if he has a couple, the career may be shortened. The other one I think is an old issue, which is, was football his biggest love when he was at UCLA? I mean, clearly it sounds like it is now. And so I think there's going to be probably some teams who know that and maybe be a little hesitant. And there's going to be other people who maybe talk to the Miami guys and go, wow, this guy has matured into a difference maker. And as you guys know, I mean, if you have a big time edge rusher, I mean, that is such a weapon to have, that I think, from some of the other guys that are talked about in terms of, if Jalen Phillips is 100% the guy he was that Miami saw, I think Jalen Phillips is better than any of the guys who do what he does in this draft.
I think there's 2 linebackers who probably benefited more from the season happening than Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah and then Zaven Collins. I mean, what about them makes them first-round linebackers? And just from what you've heard from NFL guys, why do guys that were just so productive at this position, it seems like linebacker is one of those positions that's falling a bit just in the draft in importance?
Yeah, 2 different body types. Zaven Collins is almost like, I don't know, 10 years ago, he's a 4-3 defensive end, maybe. But he's really good in space. He has a really good feel for playing in coverage. He makes a lot of plays. He is very athletic. I think one of the things that I'm not sure if you'd asked even diehard college football fans or even national college football media, if you had asked them right now in 2019 who Zaven Collins is, I don't know if a lot of them would have known, because he was like a 2-star guy, and he just really, he played on a team that had a really good year. I mean, they got out the gate and played Oklahoma State, who was a top 20 team, and they gave them a really good game. And I think people were just like, oh, how good is Oklahoma State? Their quarterback's injured or whatever. And I think then people realized, whoa, the Tulsa defense is pretty good, and this guy's really, really good. Owusu-Koramoah is, he's a guy who is, I think, maybe 215, 220 pounds. And so this, where he fits as a tweener, I think probably some people are like, okay, there's definitely a lot of potential here, but how do we want to deploy him? And I think what you talk to people who have spent a lot of time around him, faced him, coached him, is he's a terrific coverage guy. And that is quite an asset he's going to be. A lot of people I know at Notre Dame think his best football is really ahead of him. He's from that area. There was a story one of the guys told me. They said they've had a game this year where I guess like Allen Iverson showed up to see him because he's from that part of Virginia, and just like he said, he's just a really interesting, gifted kid who, quite honestly, you're for like a lot of time, probably around the early 2000s, Notre Dame didn't have that kind of like guy on the defense who was like super athletic and was just like quite honestly, that he was the guy that, Andrew, when you were in the, doing SEC stuff, that was what the SEC had a lot of.
Right.
And it's not what Notre Dame has. Now they had Jalen Smith, like whatever, 8-10 years ago, but he was a difference maker for what was a very good defense. I mean, they had two guys, one's in the draft in Jeremiah. The other one isn't and will be in a year, I guess, and Kyle Hamilton, who's this long, super athletic safety. But those guys made Notre Dame really good on defense. So, I think to me, I could see Zaven Collins more as a fit for Cleveland, but I think wherever those guys go, I expect them to be longtime NFL starters.
Bruce Feldman, our guest from Fox Sports and The Athletic. On the corner front, there's four top guys that they're kind of all over the place in terms of how you want to rank them between Surtain, Horn, Newsome. Caleb Farley's an intriguing one based on his injury situation. Is there a lot of separation between those four? I mean, we think Surtain's going to be the first one off the board, but is there a lot of separation between number 1 and number 4 at the corner spot?
I don't think there is. I mean, Newsome is the one who kind of blew up late, and he from talking to people in the Big Ten, they were like, he is, you'd hear like deceptively athletic and way more athletic than you think. And that's, I think, a function of maybe Northwestern's profile more than anything else. But he was really good. And then he had a really impressive pro day in how he worked out. JC Horn to me is more of the, I don't want to say the wild card, because from the people I talked to in the SEC, they thought JC Horn was more talented than Surtain. Now, Surtain came to Alabama as a 5-star. Everybody knows who his dad was. He's got, a great frame for it. But there are coaches I've talked to who thought JC Horn was a bigger problem to deal with in terms of they felt like we can beat Pat Surtain. JC Horn is, maybe to a fault, will be ultra physical and handsy and everything, but just like really competitive, really dynamic athlete, great change of direction. Had, from everything I heard, JC Horn to me is the guy that I think could end up being the prototypical lockdown corner more than the other three. I'm interested to see what Caleb Farley is, just because, like, it wouldn't surprise me if he gets drafted by somebody maybe a little later than people initially thought, because of, like you said, some injury stuff, because of questions about how well he tackles. And maybe 2 years from now, I could see, watching a game and there's some great receiver that Caleb Farley locks up, and all of a sudden people are talking about, where did this guy come from? Because he just has some really unique gifts, and to have that kind of speed and that kind of ability to accelerate and close while being the frame he has.
And one for me is just about, you write a lot about freak athletes, and there might not be a bigger one in this draft than Jason Oweh from Penn State. And I'm just wondering, how do you translate the freak athletic skills? I mean, his pro day was outstanding, but then the lack of production. How do people wrap their heads around that? And is there a better projection for him than what happened this past year at Penn State?
Yeah, I think he had more production in 2019. Obviously, in 2020, the other guy who's the super freak athlete at Penn State, Micah Parsons, he didn't play. He opted out. I think without Micah Parsons, I think that hurt a lot of other people on that defense, just because Micah Parsons would have been the focus of the game plan, and that would have given people a lot more to deal with. Penn State had good edge rushers around him. Shaka Toney's a good player. I mean, they've had a bunch of guys who I think are pretty talented, especially at that position. I think this is a tough evaluation, because he's a remarkable athlete. Is he a remarkable football player? Like, he's not Jalen Phillips. Jalen Phillips makes a ton of plays. Now, Jalen Phillips is much more powerful, but I mean, just in terms of, like, he's a jaw-dropping athlete in terms of how he can run and his explosiveness. But when I think of, there's Kwity Paye is another one. He's a different body type. He's 6'2", 265, 270, with an insane ability to change direction. And, he had more of a productive career at Michigan. But there are some guys like that where you wonder, is their best football just ahead of them, or are they going to be kind of underachievers because their production doesn't match up with their workouts? And so I don't know, like the best case scenario to me for Jason Owe is Ziggy Ansah went to BYU and was bounced around position wise, how they used him, had some but marginal success, but obviously was an amazing athlete. And then he got drafted into the NFL and had a very productive career as an edge rusher. And Jason Owe is even faster. I just don't know. You know, if you told me somebody was drafting him in the top 25, I'd be like, okay, this is going to be interesting. You know, just like just the lack of production would scare me, you know, a little about him. I mean, like in terms of, I had another guy on my freaks list who was high up, Boye Mafe at Minnesota, who was an edge rusher, was an extremely explosive athlete, and they thought 2020 was going to have a breakout year, and he really didn't. And again, this is, you know, it was a pandemic year, and there's a lot of stuff that went on, but there are some guys like that who are just, you know, remarkable workout athletes who maybe don't have the feel for for rushing the quarterback. And I'm not saying I wouldn't draft Jason Owe, but just in terms of, if you looked at his numbers, you'd be like, okay, this guy's a top 10 pick. If you watch him, you're like, okay, maybe he's a second or third round guy.
And then I guess last one for me, a guy that it might be a similarly tough evaluation, but Christian Barmore is probably the top ranked defensive tackle, it seems like, but it's another one of those guys at Alabama that had to wait a lot to play. And it seems like the light came on at the end. Is that another tough evaluation you think for teams, or is he just have to wait too long to play?
Yeah, I think he was behind some good players. You know, I think you told me he was a top 15 pick, I'd be like, oh, that surprises me a little bit. If you said he was a late first round guy, maybe. I don't think he was not Quinnen Williams, you know, like who was an absolute like offense wrecker when he was at Alabama, who just, you know, obviously went top 5. This guy's not Leonard Williams, you know, who was at USC and then went high. And I think he's a really good player. I don't know, you know, like I think he's a 10-year NFL probably starter. I just don't know if he's a guy who's a Pro Bowl guy.
Bruce, real quick, I know we're up against it. We appreciate your time today. Everything's been awesome, and it's been great having you. Kyle Pitts or Jamar Chase? Which one would you take?
I hate this question. I think there are 2 guys. I think there's 3 guys who are like, okay, I feel like this guy's a real good chance to be a Hall of Famer. 2 of them are the ones you just asked about. The other one is Micah Parsons. I don't know. I don't think you're going to go wrong either one. I think Kyle Pitts is different in that he's just, I don't know who the like last Kyle Pitts-ish tight end in terms of guy is. I don't even want to say who. So when I did that mock draft, there was somebody I talked to who was a coach in the SEC who works with a former longtime NFL coach. And that particular person, I guess, and this is all secondhand, said he thought Kyle Pitts was better than Antonio Gates and going to be better than, I forgot who the second, Tony Gonzalez. And I was just like, wow, that's a heavy statement. Like Jamar Chase, I think will be a great NFL receiver. I mean, people talk about Kyle Pitts like he could be as good a tight end as ever played the game. You know, so as much as I was around Jamar Chase a lot more because I spent a lot of 2019 around that LSU national title team. So I saw how he practiced. I saw what he was like against Derek Stingley, who isn't in the draft, but would be probably the highest rated cornerback if he was eligible to be in this draft. And I saw Jamar Chase beat him pretty often in one-on-ones at LSU practice. But Kyle Pitts is a hard one to say the other guy, no matter who the other guy is, you know. And look, I get it. It's a quarterback world in the NFL, but I mean, if you were to say which of these, let's say it goes 1, 2, 3, as we're taping this, Trevor Lawrence, Zach, and then Mac Jones. I mean, I would, if it was like them, the house versus Kyle Pitts, who ends up, has the best chance to be a Hall of Famer, I'm going to take Kyle Pitts on that. So I don't know. I guess my long answer is I'm going to take Kyle Pitts. Sorry, Jamal Chase.
No problem. All right. One real quick one here before we let you go. You ranked your top 25 college football coaches. And obviously you had Saban 1, Dabo 2, and you had Brian Kelly 3. Who's your favorite coach to talk to? Is there one that you learn something from every time you talk to him, that you're entertained by? Who's your favorite coach to talk to?
Oh, that's a good question. There's a bunch of guys who I would say aren't like this is kind of an off the record. I don't even know, not off the record. This is kind of like an off the beaten path answer, but like Neil Brown, the coach at West Virginia, is somebody who I think is just really, really smart and really, really is an interesting guy to talk to. The one who I always feel like I learn something when I'm around is Matt Campbell, the Iowa State coach. And he's a great coach. He's in the top 10 of my list. But I think with him, like a lot of times we as reporters get caught into the scheme stuff, which we kind of think is trendy and sexy or whatever. And I think what he's really good at seeing is, okay, this is why I bought into this. And it's like, culture gets overused a lot, but I think there's so much substance to him, and just like kind of, I remember doing one of his games. They played at Oklahoma. It was when Jalen Hurts was a quarterback. So it was 2 years ago. And they're down 21-0. And they had a couple of players. One of them was their best defensive player drop what should have been a pick six. I don't know if both would have been pick sixes, but one would have for sure. And so I'm walking back on the field, start of the second half with him across the field in Oklahoma. And I was like, I forgot what my question was, but like, how do you get this team back in the game? And he kind of rattled through a bunch of things that he said. And he goes, all I know is I know our team's going to play their ass off. We're coming back. And the game went down to the last play. And I was just like, they lost basically on a 2-point play. And, it's like, for the people who are in the NFL and you kind of hear his name, but it's like, you're probably not paying much attention to Iowa State unless you have a connection to the place. You go, okay, it's a little like Pat Fitz, but Pat Fitz is more out there in terms of visibility. He's been there longer. But I think with Campbell, it's like he's the real deal in terms of, for anybody who's been around him and spent some time with him, you're like, okay, I totally get it. There's sometimes some names get trendy as people kind of buzz about, maybe they had a great quarterback one year and, they're going to, the NFL is going to sniff around on them. With Matt Campbell, anybody who's spent time around him, you understand why.
Bruce, we appreciate the time. Just awesome stuff. And we appreciate that all you do. And we enjoy reading you and following you and watching you on Fox Sports. Continued success. All the best. Make sure you follow him on Twitter at Bruce Feldman CFB. Subscribe to The Athletic today to read his great stuff. And Bruce, continued success. Enjoy a little bit of downtime before this all ramps up again. And here's hoping 2021 we're back to somewhat of a normal college football season, as you mentioned earlier.
No, I appreciate it. I love talking about the draft, and it's been fun. I mean, as somebody who covered Baker a lot, I try to keep an eye on them just because he was a blast to cover. So I'm excited to see what happens in a couple of weeks.
Bruce, all the best. Thanks again.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks to Bruce Feldman for his time, his insight, and his analysis. Great stuff from him. You can catch him on Fox Sports, and make sure you subscribe to The Athletic today to catch his work. Does some really, really great stuff. And as you mentioned, Gribble dipped his pen into the draft stuff here over the last couple of years and done a nice job with it. Your biggest takeaway from Bruce Feldman?
Well, I just think the knowledge that he has is so vast, and honestly, it made me encouraged by the things he said about some of these players, because I think ultimately we asked him about a lot of defensive guys, and I think ultimately one of these guys is going to be available. for the Browns at some point. And I think that when you're picking a defensive player in the first round of the draft, you're tending to get a little bit of value, especially this year with some of these offensive players going pretty high in the first round. So I think the Browns are in a position to get a good player. It's just not someone I can definitively predict at this point, because 26 is a lot of picks to wait before you make that selection.
All right. Speaking of that, time for our third segment of the program. Will or will not? Will the player be there at 26? Do we think today, 3 weeks out from the draft? Again, a lot can change in 3 weeks, as we've seen over the last couple weeks with numerous teams around the league. Will that player be there at 26 or will they not? Gribble, I'll start with you. Kwity Paye, edge, Michigan. Will or will not be there at 26?
I'm going to go with will not. And I think it's because a lot of people think he's maybe the top pass rusher in this year's draft. And I just don't see the top pass rusher going all the way down to 26. And I think with Paye, he's got the perfect mix of like physical, freakish upside and had just enough production where at Michigan, where you can think this guy can turn that athletic ability into production. And I think that will be enough. I think it'll be after the midpoint of the draft, but I think he'll be probably gone right around that 20 mark.
All right. J.C. Horn for me, corner at South Carolina. I think we would all love him. Gribbs, I think we would all love to see him at pick 26. I think his stock is rising. I think he's probably the number 2 corner on the board right now with Farley's injury, and not really sure, what his status is going to be. Unfortunately, I think he will not be there at pick number 26 for the Browns. Jalen Phillips, defensive end out of Miami. Will he or will he not be there at 26 in your opinion?
I'm going to go with will not. And I know that Bruce touched on some of the questions regarding him that teams are going to have to get answered in the pre-draft process, that they're going to have to be comfortable with, whether it's the concussion history or his time at UCLA, things like that. But I think that the memories of what he did last season are just going to be too fresh. And I think that, so you have the combination of the athleticism, how big he's for Miami last year. I think he's going to be tough to let sit there all the way to 26. I think he'll be gone. And I think that may make the Browns' decision easier at 26 if he is off the board, because I think he's a really good player that would make you, especially with his other teammate at Miami, deciding which one to take. I think that he's probably going to be the first one of the two.
Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah. And the fact that I got through that without screwing it up.
That's perfect.
Gold stars, baby. Linebacker, Notre Dame. I think he will be there at pick number 26. And the reason, I think the corners are moving up the board, and I think the linebackers are getting pushed back. And all of a sudden, too, I'm starting to see a lot of mock draft scribs, a lot of offensive linemen moving up. And all of a sudden, I think there could be runs on both of those positions, which are going to push a lot of those linebackers down. And hence why maybe we're seeing linebackers still mock to the Browns at pick 26.
Yeah, he's an interesting one because I think you can look at it two ways. His versatility could be huge for a team. I mean, I think with the way how athletic he is, and you could put him at safety, you could put him at linebacker, but then you wonder, our team's going to be like, well, where do we play him? Like, and then that might draw some hesitancy. It's like, I think some people have compared him to Isaiah Simmons, but said he's not quite there yet. So will be interesting. I would have personally picked will not, but I think it would not surprise me if he got to that point.
All right, for you, Gregory Rousseau, the other defensive end from Miami.
I'm going to go with Will, and I did have him in my last mock draft going to the Browns, and I think that, again, I think the year off has hurt some of these guys that maybe weren't the sure thing. I mean, you hear it brought up with everyone, including Bruce earlier, the 1 year, and I think 1 year of college football basically could draw some hesitancy, especially when that 1 year was not last year. And I think that he is a talented player that had a huge 2019. But I think he could be someone like where the Browns at 26 could really find something great. And I think he could be there.
Greg Newsome, corner out of Northwestern. I am on the fence big time. I feel like if he's there when the Bears are picking, there's a solid chance the Bears could pluck him right out of their own backyard. I feel like Jacksonville maybe could make a play for him. I'm going to say will will not be there. But I would love to see him on the board at pick 26. But I think his stock is rising to the point where someone in the 5 picks before us is going to end up snagging him.
Yeah, I think Newsome is like a high floor kind of guy where it's like you draft him and you can plug him in, and I think you're no matter what, you're getting a solid player. And I think that could be the draw of him with the teams in front of the Browns.
All right, for you, Caleb Farley, cornerback, Virginia Tech.
This is a tough one.
Yeah.
I'm gonna go with Will Not, and I think that, which could be great for the Browns if everything checks out medically, but this is a draft process where there is a lot of unknowns and there's a lot of uncertainty based on the weirdness of the last year. If this guy has had back surgery, no matter how minor it is, that qualifies as a known. That's something compared to something you don't know. And we see these guys every year that fall because of injuries, whether it be Miles Jack, Jalen Smith with the Cowboys. These are more serious injuries, obviously, but it seems like the injuries are always the biggest hangups with some of these guys. And that to me, with not knowing anything about the actual nature of the injury, I just wonder how teams are going to evaluate it, because I think he's a talented player. And I think that all it does is take one team ahead of the Browns to be like, all right, we're good with this. This is a steal. We're going to take this guy. But it just wouldn't surprise me. So again, could be a great value for the Browns at 26, but we'll see if he gets that far, because I could then end up looking really silly here and he goes at like number 9 or something like that. I mean, that's how good he is.
Yeah, I think medicals are actually happening this week in Indianapolis. Yeah. So I think, hopefully we'll start hearing a few things and maybe getting some additional information on his status. I mean, I have him falling. I have Newsome leaping over him and Horn ahead of him. But like you said, it wouldn't surprise me if all of a sudden at pick 12, he's gone. By pick 12, he's off the board because of his talent.
Yeah, so. I mean, and it could also be a byproduct of like all these other corners have been really good. And that's where it comes to how many teams actually want to take a corner with their first round pick. Again, when I look at this list of like 5 corners, I don't see one that would disappoint me, honestly. So I think that it'll be interesting what order they actually go in here.
All right, I'm going to flip-flop things because I want you to, because you've talked about him before in some of our earlier mock drafts and some of our podcasts, and that's Jason Owe, the edge out of Penn State. Will he or will he not be there at pick number 26?
I mean, if there was a combine, this guy would have been the combine all-star, which tends to help some people. But then you look at a guy like DK Metcalf, who was the combine all-star, and he fell because of some questions about his productivity. And I think Owe will be there. And I just think that for me, it's going to come down to, can a team in the top 25 take a pass rusher that didn't have any sacks last year? And I think that's what you'd have to wrap your head around, because I just do think this guy's a total athletic freak. I mean, it reminds me of, who's the guy with the Bears, like Leonard Floyd, like that kind of pass rusher, like the super athletic guy who turned out to be a really good player for the Bears these last few years. And it's one of those where it's more about trusting your coaching ability to like harness what you can do with that athleticism, because it's truly God-given. But I think that he's someone that is going to cause a lot of back and forth in rooms, because you just watch what he can do and you're like, this is incredible. But then you have the other people asking, well, why didn't he get to the quarterback more? So I do think he will. And it's just, he'll be an interesting case study on what teams value and where that falls.
Yeah. I think there's a couple guys like that. And the final one, Asante Samuel Jr., the corner out of Florida State. I think he's the one corner that I can say with confidence that I believe he will be there at 26. I'm not sure about any of the other ones. I think he will be there. I feel confident in saying he will be there. The question is, where is he in regards to everybody else in that corner class? And can he be a guy that can be a day one impact type of player at pick 26 for the Browns?
How about the pedigree in this year's cornerbacks class? I mean, you got Surtain, J.C. Horn. I mean, with the connection to Joe Horn, and then this is wild. I mean, I don't know if it's making me feel old, first off, and then
Yes.
Secondly, how have you had like one position group have this much NFL pedigree in it? That's just crazy.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see. I think he's there. I think he's an option for the Browns at pick number 26. We want to thank Bruce Feldman for his time, all of his time and his insight. Fantastic interview. Jeff McDaniel for all of his hard work behind the scenes. Make sure you log on to clevelandbrowns.com or wherever you get your podcasts. Like and subscribe today to the best podcast available. You can also check us out on YouTube, youtube.com/Browns. We are back with you next week, 2 weeks at that point till the NFL draft. Looking forward to it and seeing how things unfold. Will there be another big trade in the NFL in the next 7 days? Something to watch indeed. For Andrew Gribble, I'm Jason Gibbs. Till next week, thanks for watching. Thanks for listening to the best podcast available